Okay, I'm going to attempt to do sort of a, I don't know, 15, 20-minute introduction to this sort of adventure in a room, minimal, kind of minimalist project, mostly to demonstrate the concepts behind the Unity UI and some basic things with regards to game objects and transforms and basic interaction, right? This is going to be a turn-based game, so our use of time, our use of physics, we're going to kind of put that aside. This is going to be really just click, 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 have an action happen, give us an opportunity to kind of test out some basic coding skills, if then sort of, if else sort of constructs and so on. So I have a Unity project open. I created this as a 2D project. Now, Unity 2D projects and 3D projects, they're going to be similar. You may see, if your screens don't look quite like this, your game window doesn't look quite like this, maybe your screen looks kind of like this with it, kind of different perspective. You can switch into 2D mode, right? You can also do things like switch into, I think I've got, this is wireframe. So if I wanted, I could switch this to, I forget now where that setting is. Oh, here's shaded wireframe, and so on, different modes. So it's just kind of, a normal, plain, vanilla, boring sort of scene view here. Do it 2D. 2D definitely will make life easier if you're for the first version here. All right. Now, this scene I did create. It does have a single thing on the canvas right now. And I'm going to even go ahead. I'm going to delete the canvas, and I'm going to delete this event system even. So you probably see you might have a scene that does nothing but a main camera in it. Okay. Now, if you have any red messages up here, you have any warnings, alerts, and so on, depending on the version of Unity you have, you may actually need to double check, go to the package manager, make sure any packages you are using are up to date. If you see anything odd in here about different out of date versions, go ahead and click on one, update it if you need to, and so on. You may see some odd things, especially as we're sharing projects. It's something to be aware of, be careful of. I've seen that happen a little bit. So back in the main camera, main scene here, right? So if I click on this, it might say, okay, go to the sample scene. I am in the sample scene. It's going to ask me to save it again, but here I am, sample scene. All right, if I double click on the main camera, you see it zooms into the main camera. I don't yet have a canvas. So in this game, let's think about it. All right, the idea is to create a simple room. The player is in the room. The player has to maybe avoid something and pick up something in order to get out of the room, right? But we want to do that with as little graphics as possible, but we want to use the Unity UI. So our interactions are going to be through the UI. Our text, our feedback to the player is going to be to the UI, or if it's not through the UI, it should be through audio, right? So we're going to use audio sources again, all right? So here's what we're going to do. So we have the scene. The first thing we want to do is we want to go ahead and put some text in the scene, right? If we right click, we should see UI under here. Create empty 2D, and somehow I've managed to do it here. I do not see UI elements. It's kind of bizarre. If that happens, don't freak out. You might want to restart Unity. That's one way to do it. Or you can come to the window here and see UI. Oh, we don't see UI elements there as well. All right. So in this case, I'm going to do the following. I'm going to shut down. It's going to ask me, do you want to save the project? Maybe not. I'm going to open it up again. No reason to freak out. Open it up again. I'm going to open up, that was Amorous project, I believe. Hopefully it will come back. I'm not going to freak out. I'm not going to hold my breath. Deep cleansing breath. Unity does that from time to time. Just keep life interesting. You notice if I click now, there it is, UI. There it is. It is there. So what happened? What got rid of it? I don't know. I always want to test things out. If I let it get rid of the event system, if I said delete the event system, nope, UI is still there. All right, if I deleted the canvas, let's go ahead and delete that canvas. And nope, still there. Okay, it was just a weird Unity issue. I think what happened likely was that because I opened up another project in another Unity and something like that, maybe there's something out of date, so let's not worry about it. All right, so in scenes, sample scene, save. Ooh, let's see, did this cause the problem? This should be interesting. Back in the sample scene, can I put that in there? Nope, UI is still there. Good. All right, you should see that in the sample scene. So we'll say, go ahead. All right, let's put some. First thing I'm going to do is I put some text in that scene. All right, so we say UI text. And this is going to be called, we'll call this our main text. Okay, all one word, should be capital main, sort of optionally capital main. We're naming an object, so technically, could it be capital? Could it be lowercase? I don't know. We'll leave it at that. I'm going to make the text font bigger. I'm going to make it 32, and you'll notice it disappears. Why did it disappear? Because its box was not big enough for it. So I'm going to go ahead and make that box bigger. You'll see this is using the sizing tool here, the rect tool. I can also use the move tool to kind of move it around. And I'm going to say within my UI, here is my text box. Okay. And I could say align to the center of the text box and so on, but I'm just going to go ahead. All right, let's leave that the way it is. So some text is there. That's our main text. Okay. Now let's think about it. Okay, we want to have some main text that tells the character what's going on, but maybe we want some sort of additional text. So I'm going to create some additional text. I'm going to say UI text, and we're going to call this what? Proximity text, or prox text. Right? So I'm going to use that as some kind of real-time interactive element, perhaps. That's going to say, oh, are you getting closer? Are you getting further away? Some kind of feedback, right? Or maybe I can call that feedback text. I'm always changing my mind. Feedback text. All right, I like that. And we'll move that around. Move it up, down, wherever. Over there. All right. So we'll even put feedback in there, and we'll put some stuff in this text box, main information. Okay, and maybe later on we're going to have something else. We have feedback text. Not going to even copy and paste. And this we're going to call this score text. Okay, so I have a couple of different types of text, and if I move this around, right now it's initially right on top. So I'm going to move it back there. We'll call this score text. All right. So I know somehow I'm going to want to have in my game, I have main information I'm going to be telling the user, I have some kind of additional feedback on things, and I'm going to have some kind of score. Okay, these are good things. I'm designing my scene here. So I save. I'm going to zoom in on the canvas here, so I see the canvas. Zoom in a little bit. I have nothing actually in the world. This is the big difference. The canvas is a thing that overlays information on the world, and the camera sees stuff that is in the world. Okay, so remember, canvas overlay over the world, camera in the world, right? So if we want to see things that are in the world, we double click on the camera. Anything that is a child of the canvas lives in that overlay, so be careful about that. All right, so now back again here. Main camera, canvas. You may or may not have an event system. Don't worry about it. If you have an event system or not, don't worry about it. It should be okay, I believe, for now. All right, so that's how we're going to get stuff back to the user. Now, if we wanted to, at this point, we could say, all right, let's have a script somewhere in the scene. We want an object. We're going to create an empty object, right? Create an empty object that we're going to just call the player. Or player, right? There's our player object. Okay. So the player object happens, right? The player object is at the center of the world at this point. If we look at the inspector for the player, it is at 0, 0, minus 10. Now, the main camera is also at 0, 0, minus 10, so I'm going to make sure to put the player actually at 0, 0, 0, so that the player can be potentially seen by the camera. You know, so you don't see it yet because it has no visibility, has nothing on it. There's no image associated with it. Okay, so not worried about it. So add a component, I could say, well, let's see. What kind of components could I put on it? I could put lots of things. AR, audio effects, layout, mesh, physics 2D, and so on. Right? So in this case, I could look for rendering, and I might have some sort of thing, and so on. And let's see, where's sprite render? There's a sprite renderer right there. Okay, so here's a sprite renderer. Put that on the scene, right? So if I want to put a sprite image on there. Now, if I want to put a sprite in the scene, I need to have some sort of image in the scene. So thankfully for me here, I have already grabbed this from a couple places. I'm on the other screen. Don't worry, I'll come back. We're going to go to Intro to Game Programming, Intro Project Assets. Here we go. Images. All right. So here's an image I'm going to use. I'm dragging this image in. This is an RPI seal. This is our logo, our school logo. I'm going to drag it. You can see it has transparency. It is just an image. I'm going to go ahead, drag that, and put that in the sprite there. Now I can see it. Wonderful. Now it's awfully big. I don't want it that big. How can I make it smaller? Well, I can click on this, and I can change the import settings. This is, maybe more information. Pixels per unit. I'm going to make it 1,000 pixels per unit. Apply. So that's 1/10 the size that it used to be. Actually, 1/100th, I guess, something like that. So, but there it is. There it is in the scene. It is now a game object, a player game object that has a sprite renderer on it, and that sprite renderer now has a sprite or a bitmap or an image on it. All right. So I have a game. I have feedback to the user. I have the player. Now, to interact with the player, I want to put some buttons in. Okay, the buttons are going to be also on the canvas. And I'm going to say, all right, UI button. There it is in the scene, on the canvas here. You can actually kind of see it over here as well, right? Kind of frightening, but don't worry about it. Okay, the main thing is that it is really part of the canvas. And I'll go ahead and move that button up to where I want it to be. Now, so we're going to design the interaction with the user according to these buttons. Now, I've done that in some of the other scenes, some of the other videos, so I'm not going to get into that, but I want the buttons and I want the things that happen on their actions on click to control the player, right? So the player is going to have a script on it, and that's going to allow for the buttons to interact with that player object and move it around the world, to manipulate its X and Y, right? Its position in the world, its transform, right? So you need to come up with a strategy for, I say in the requirements, 4 buttons: a D-pad, directional pad, left, right, up, down, north, south, east, west, whatever you want to call it, and those will interact with the player and make the player move in some direction. Now, let's design the game again a little bit more. We'll say, okay, all right, what's the goal of the game? The goal is to move the player, somehow get it out of the room, or have it win, find something important, right? So within the game, we can place other objects, other events, other objects in the scene. Okay, so these are going to be independent. They're not going to be on the canvas. They're going to be in the world just the way the player is. So let's create them. Now we could create them as just empty, or we could create them as audio. They could be audio sources, or they could be empty. So for now, we wanted to have something, and we'll go ahead. We'll make them audio sources. Right? And we'll position them somewhere in the world. You want them to be within the camera's view, right? It's going to be a little bit weird. We're going to have this overlay, but then we're going to have the camera sort of underneath it. Let's not get too worried about that. So there we are. Where's the audio source? Oh, it's not even on the screen there. We should double click. Always double click on the main camera and then place things in there. So now I'm going to go back up to here, say 0, 0, 0. There it is. It's centered. I can move it somewhere in the world. Move it down to this corner here. So if I want, I could just say, well, okay, I need a goal, and I need some sort of thing I need to find. So maybe I just use 2 audio sources. Maybe there's 3 audio sources. All right, so go ahead and we'll use those. Copy, paste. So I'll put this other one up here. And I'm going to put this other one, I'm going to put this last one sort of here, and I'm going to put one of these sort of like right near or even on top of this. Okay, so these two are located at almost exactly the same spot, and that's fine. Okay, you can have things that are located in the same spot. All right, so thinking about the design of the game now, What I'm going to want to do is take this player, which has a position in the world, and maybe I, round these out. So let's see. I have the player, and what I want the player to do is the player should find this thing over here. So uh, we'll call it goal 1. Okay. And then we want to, once you get goal 1, we want you to go to goal 2, perhaps. Right? And this intermediate one, I'm going to use, just for now, there's more efficient ways to do this, but for now, we're going to call this beacon. Okay? So that audio source, the purpose of that audio source is really just to be a beacon. So as the player moves around, we're going to dynamically change things about the beacon so that the volume perhaps changes up and down as the player moves towards it or away from it. So this way the player has some way of knowing where roughly that goal 2 is, because goal 2 is going to be, relative to where we want to get. So the game idea is going to be, okay, the player will move to goal 1, and once it touches goal 1, and by touches it means, okay, once the distance between the player and goal 1 reaches a very small number, so if distance between these two vectors, or these two positions, reaches a small number, then you can set found to true. And you can also do things. You could decide that this should play some magic sound, or maybe this has some continuous sound that the player uses to locate it. Right? So it could be, okay, you move towards this one's volume turns up. You move towards this one's volume turns up, and vice versa. Right? So these are going to be, goal 1 could also be a beacon. Right? Goal 2, now the reason I put beacon here and goal 2 is because ultimately what I want to have happen is that goal 2 should be a sound that plays once you've already reached goal 1 and got back to goal 2. And rather than force you to kind of change things around, we're just going to say, okay, goal 1 is something that plays all the time in a loop, for example. The beacon is something that plays on awake and loops, plays all the time. But goal 2 does not play on awake. It will only play when the user reaches that. So it's going to say if the distance between the player and goal 2 is very, very small, and you've already had some interaction with goal 1, then play that sound, play that win sound, right? So goal 2 is actually, we'll call it winning goal. All right, so that's our new design. So there's goal 1, the beacon, and the winning goal. All right, so the beacon's purpose is really just to see where you are, and the winning goal is the sound that's going to be sort of a one-shot that you can just say, beacon, get component audio source, play. And that's going to play that sound. All right. And so this is going to move around and so on. That's the basic idea of the game. Now, as the player moves, you're going to want to have feedback to the player in the form of the score and say, okay, you're getting closer to this object. Maybe it should say, your goal is to find goal 1. And then feedback says, you got closer, you got closer, you got closer, you got further away, you got further away. Okay, and the score will tell you how many turns have passed, perhaps. Then, on top of that, we want to have some sort of action. So we have the direction pad here, and we want to have one additional button. Could be a button, could be a toggle, which is going to be the thing that says, so I'll just put here, I'm going to call it a toggle. And go to my canvas, and you'll see the toggle has been put way in the corner there, real tiny. So we're going to need to move that toggle, and usually I put that like underneath the directional pad for some reason. And that's going to be the action or state, right? So it's a toggle. You're just going to say, okay, what is the state? Is the flashlight turned on? Is my homing beacon turned on? Is my radar turned on? How many? And then you can change the text in there to say how many uses do I have left, or how, whatever. You can use this text just like you'd use any other text. All right. So this becomes the action. Now, instead of a toggle, you could just have it another button. And if it's another button, maybe you have something that governs how many times can you press that button and what happens as a result of pressing that button. Those are the things that are going to be in your scripts. So hopefully with this in mind, then we can say, all right, here's the helping action or helping state, something that governs the state. There's going to be our 4 buttons over here, and maybe I'll just for ease of demonstration here, I'll say, yep, it's going to be 4 buttons. Maybe you want to arrange them in a way that more says directional pad than this, and size them. You can get into all that kind of stuff yourself, and name them appropriately. So let's see, button. I'm going to go ahead and move all 4 buttons here. Oops, I meant to move all 4 buttons. All right, so now you can get into a little bit of designing your game, designing your interface, and remember, you have these 4 buttons. Their purpose is to move the player around. As the player moves around, you're going to check its distance from it to these other objects, the goal, the beacon, the winning goal, and so on. And then you want to tell the story, right? You want to tell the story about what happened as a result of that move, right? Did the player see something? Did the player get closer to something? Did the player notice something, and so on, right? Now, one other thing, I almost forgot. The player itself, if we go see our player, we have a sprite render on the player. Another thing you can do is go ahead, add a component, and add an audio source onto the player. We also don't want it to play on awake. We don't want it to loop. It's going to be a one-shot sound. And this sound, we're going to say, okay, if the player bumps into the wall, hits some constraint, because you want the world to be constrained. The player shouldn't move all over the place. The player should really only move within the extents of the camera here, right? So the audio source that is on the player, right? Player with an audio source, and maybe that's, if you've seen my other videos, you've seen the dope, ugh, or the whatever, or crunch sound. You can have whatever sound you like in here, and then use that get component audio source play, that command, whenever you see that the distance that the player tried to move the player object, when that exceeds certain boundaries. All right. So that's kind of the rundown. Use your imagination. What are the goals with regards to being in the room here? How is this action? What is it? Is it a flashlight? Can we see the player all the time? Do we only see the player when this is toggled? Do we only see what else is in the room when this is toggled? How many charges, how many uses? Use your imagination on all those things. But that's the main idea, is that you have a player in some confined space that has to move, change its transform, and then compare its distance to figure out, is it close to other objects? Did it interact? Maybe when you get this target, it's a goal 1 is some person, and they give you a message, right? And the message is, you have to go over here, and you're enlightened. So make up the story, and use that to fill in these text fields and so on. So it's just a little simple story in a room. Goal 1, goal 2, maybe more. If you get really advanced, I've seen some people who put like enemies in the room to be avoided, that as long as you are using the toggle, you can disperse your enemies if you're closer to them, if they're zombies and so on. So feel free to get interesting there. All right, I'll leave that as inspiration for the first adventure game project.